Hello and welcome to another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. My name is Andrew Claudio, aka GMAC, and it's time to preview another Knicks matchup against the Toronto Raptors, a team that has mattered a lot to this franchise, the New York Knicks franchise this season, whether it be the civil suit that just kind of went away and we haven't heard about it in a while. So who knows what eventually happened with that? Maybe the OG Anunoby, Immanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett. I'm just going to say it. Precious Achiuwa. Elements of that trade, or were the final, what was it called? When they settled. Yes, they settled in court to just let the trade go through. And that's the last we're going to hear of it. Maybe you had Jontay Porter overs and you're parlaying them with Precious Achiuwa overs, or I guess technically Jontay Porter unders to parlay them with Precious Achiuwa overs. The Raptors season has been fascinating to say the least from afar. And I'm sure if we got an expert here to tell us about how the Raptors season has gone, he would probably use some other choice words for the season. So it is time to welcome back our good friend from up north, Mr. Es Baraheni. You gave us the 411 on OG Anunoby. You warned us about weird injuries.
Yep.
When he's been on the court, he's been amazing. And then he's also been off the court for weird injuries, like you said.
Yeah.
But first and foremost, how are you, my friend? Welcome back.
I'm good, man. Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know if I talked to you about this, but I got called a Knicks fan like a week ago. And so I felt honored, and I feel honored coming on this podcast and, talking with a fellow Knicks fan. So
wow. That used to not be a compliment.
Like, you're right.
Like recently wasn't a compliment to be called a Knicks fan. So how times have changed, how things have really turned around
Indeed.
Here in Knicks land.
Yeah.
So we both follow like basketball, and we both follow sports in general, right? And I'm sure there have been seasons that you just like forget, right? Like the Knicks have had so many seasons that I could forget, right? And then there are those ones you remember that are normally positive because you're like, oh, that was the year we went, like I'm sure for the Raptors, the year we won the title, the year we went to the conference finals, the year, Vinsanity when we went to the second round against the Sixers, right?
Sure.
And then there are those years that you just remember for all the wrong reasons. Like 2017 for Knicks fans is a year for all the wrong reasons that I'll remember, because it was like this first year of Joakim Noah, and they like went all in on Derrick Rose and Joakim Noah, and Courtney Lee like spent a ton of money. And they had Porzingis, and Carmelo was on the team, but wouldn't waive his no trade clause. And he was fighting with Phil Jackson through like the media, and you just heard all these murmurs. Derrick Rose just like had an unexcused absence, just disappeared for a game, and no one knew what the reason. He just was out, absence. Charles Oakley got escorted from the building, like by security in the middle of a game. That was just a weird season altogether. And it ended with Kristaps Porzingis leaving his exit meeting, or skipping his exit meeting, and Phil Jackson trying to trade him. Potentially the right move in hindsight. So that's one of those seasons from hell that we remember. Then we have this Raptors season. So you put out this list yesterday on the good old X app, but we call it Twitter in my neck of the woods.
Right.
I got 9 things that you put here, and you didn't even include that the Knicks and the Raptors are.
There's more than the Knicks lost. There's just more.
Are still in civil court. So, the 9 things: let go of a longtime coach, Nick Nurse. Starting point guard walked, Fred VanVleet. The OG Anunoby trade. The Pascal Siakam trade. Scotty Barnes is an all-star. Oh, hey, they're fun. Scotty injury. Everyone injured. Potential Ponzi scheme. How has the season from hell that I just laid out and kind of detailed, how has it been from your experience this year?
Yeah, I mean, fans on Twitter were very quick to remind me that there were a couple things I forgot. Nick's lawsuit being one of them, pizza party being one of them. They won 3 in a row for the first time all season. They probably will never win 3 in a row again. It's been a very, very long season. Not to mention Christian Coloco, their big man in the middle, had to basically leave the NBA because of a blood clot issue. And so, like, it's just been everything you could ever imagine that you could expect to happen for an NBA team happened to this team. it's so much to deal with. And I've said it before, but it just felt like they played like 6 seasons. You know, there was the first season, which was, okay, we've got this group. Let's see what we can do with it. They trade OG. And now they have RJ Quickley and Pascal. And they're like, all right, let's see the new season. Let's see how it looks. 3 weeks later, they trade Pascal. It's like, all right, new season. Let's see how it looks. And then the injuries happen. And then it's like, okay, all right, new season. Let's see how it looks. And it's just been that process. Sure, as a content, writer, podcast, whatever you want to call me, I've been able to, I guess, have a lot to talk about. But sometimes I feel like I wish there wasn't a lot to talk about. I wish I could have just got back to the basketball side of things, talk about Ochai Agbaji and why he's going to look good for the Raptors, or, whoever. But it's been a long, exhausting season. A lot of media members want to throw a party once this season is over. And so maybe that will happen. We'll see. Yeah.
A pizza party would make sense if that was the party that you guys threw. And look, I saw your tweet, I guess it was earlier this morning, about the Agbaji film breakdowns that you did. And man, look at him doing the Lord's work on a team that's lost 11 straight and he's breaking down film. That's commitment right there. Right, I commend you. The second half of that video, though, was on the Jontay Porter situation. And look, I obviously, I'm in a state, New York, that allows gambling. And
same here in Canada, right? Yeah.
Well, so like it's very prevalent in my world, and I'm someone that gambles, so it's not as much of like taboo as it seems to be, like having people clutch pearls. Now I do recognize like the integrity of the game being questioned. This is absolutely the way that it would be. And for those who are unaware of what the Jontay Porter situation is, he's a player on the Raptors that I guess he's just kind of had like an up and down, like off the bench rotation spots, right? Like he's not like,
honestly, man, like it was to the point where he had played well enough and he was showing enough of the skills that the Raptors were looking for. And he's young enough to the point where I thought, and many people thought, I would probably assume the Raptors were going to give him a long-term contract this summer, convert his contract from the two-way contract that it is to a multi-million-dollar contract this summer. And so that's why this news coming out is sort of puzzling, because it's like, if this was around the corner, and according to everything that I've heard, it pretty much was around the corner that this guy was going to get a deal. What incentivizes you? And not to mention, he's like the brother of Michael Porter Jr., max contract NBA player. It's not like it's a money thing. It seems to be, he found a scheme and I don't know. We'll see what happens with the end result of things. But yeah, I mean, look, can I bring something up, since you're a person who, like, I don't necessarily gamble as much, right? Not much of a gambler. I'll partake in a casino every now and then. My friends do, so we'll go. But like, I'm not like betting lines all the time and money, point spreads and parlays and whatnot. I'm not doing that all the time. That being said, how do you feel about, I guess, the last couple of years of like the gambling being incorporated into sports, and the NBA with the NBA app asking to get it thrown onto the league pass and whatnot? Like, how do you feel about all that, knowing that there's this sort of drawback that could happen with Jontay Porter, even Shohei Ohtani in baseball, like that, right? It's funny. All of this is sort of happening within the last 2 or 3 weeks. JB Bickerstaff had that quote where he said he got threatened, and Tyrese Halliburton said, guys are getting mad at the parlays and whatnot. How do you feel knowing all that, I guess?
So knowing all that, I do think that, and it's still something I wrestle with, because look, like, we've had gambling sponsors on this show.
Same with us. Yeah.
So you understand how it would sound hypocritical of both of us to be like, gambling's wrong and the NBA needs to, fix it, and they're reaping what they've sown. But by the way, let's take a quick break to hear about this promo code.
Right.
Deposit match. Like, I understand it's just become so incorporated into the sports conversation. Now, it kind of always was, but it was always like this underground thing that, I've got a guy I can, like, okay, so I'll just like finally bring this up. part of now I was obviously going to always propose to my then girlfriend at the time, now wife.
Right.
But one of the things that rushed the process was I placed the prop bet in 2021 on Julius Randle to win most improved player. And I got it at like early in the season odds. And then throughout the season, it led to a lucrative payday. I had to like go to New Jersey to place that bet. So there's like, I understand that there is like with all things that have addictive tendencies, whether it be, certain drugs, certain like alcohol, how about your cell phone? Yeah. All of these things require moderation and discipline. And it's why like I haven't placed a bet in a couple of weeks because the football season ended. And that was usually the season that like I really dove into it. And I'm at a place personally where I'm so light of a gambler that I know my limits and I'm able to say, okay, let me take a break for a couple of weeks. And I also have like allotted certain capital that is like just for that. And if I ever go over it, I don't refill it. It's not an addictive thing for me.
Sure. Yeah.
I do recognize that it is a problem for some. And the problem that I think the NBA is facing is the way that they're just like in bed with a lot of these companies at the moment. And like, I understand, again, that's where the hypocrisy of like what we do comes in. But like when the integrity of your sport comes into play to where like, we're going to talk about OG Anunoby and like, maybe like, I'm not even suggesting that this is what happened, but like he hurt his elbow and then like missed a game or like played poorly the next two games. Right. One could argue that he was pulling a Jontay Porter in the moment. Maybe you had the OG Anunoby over. Right. You're probably wrong, but that's the question of the integrity. Here's another thing. I was ready to make a joke when I saw the Jontay Porter thing yesterday that they should investigate Alec Burks next. And then I realized he was hurt. And I was like, okay, I can't make that joke. And I hope Alec gets better. And maybe that explains why he's played so poorly. But like the officiating and what we've seen this year, that is something that can get called into question
big time. Yeah.
So specifically from an integrity of your sport standpoint, that's the issue that all these leagues are going to come into. I think each person has to, like, I mean, whether it becomes an issue for you personally, everybody's different. So that's more just where I stand on it. But I recognize from the actually making sure that the playing field stays fair, it becomes more and more difficult to legislate the easier you allow access to it, where a Jontay Porter, someone that, look, I follow the league. I watch a ton of basketball. I've watched the Raptors a ton this year. Not going to pretend I knew who this guy was like a month ago. And and look, I don't know if this is what signaled it. Someone taking Jontay Porter unders, like that would have flagged something for me. So I put $10,000 on a Jontay Porter under, a 4-leg parlay. Like, what is happening? Like that, I think is that's absolutely the thing. It's not going to be a Giannis or like a LeBron. It's going to be someone that is a two-way player that like this actually would be an uptick in income. So, there's it's like push and pull.
It's a push and pull. And I love how you brought up the integrity side, because I think that's a really, really important aspect to discuss, because you look at the way the league is promoting it. And on the other side of it, there's this conversation that, well, young people don't necessarily watch the NBA like me and you anymore. Like they're consuming it on their phone and they're consuming it on TikTok or on YouTube. They'll watch like a recap or whatnot. And so at the same time, the NBA is worried about viewership, worried about drawing eyes and getting young guys to really be down to watch the NBA. And at the same time, it's like, hey, by the way, young person, come put $20 on LeBron James over under, right? And like that person doesn't know the implications. Hey, I remember when I was a kid and in college, they'd be like, yo, sign up for this credit card, $500, and you get caught into that scam or whatever, and you get looped into it, you get screwed over, right? Some young people don't really realize that aspect of it. And so you bring in the issue of viewership and the issue of like drawing in the younger fan, all while incorporating the gambling side of things. And it's like this melting pot, this recipe for disaster, for something bad to happen. And we're sort of seeing that now with Jontay. And I think, it's sort of a different conversation when it comes to the fan aspect and the players themselves potentially betting on things. But I do think there is, I guess, a subconscious, like, if you're promoting it as much as you are, and if you're putting it so much into the product, then it's going to be at the forefront of a lot of people's minds when it comes to the game. And so that draws the attention of the players as well, who might think they can take advantage of that situation. And I mean, in Jontay's case, it's really strange because, again, brother of a multi-million-dollar guy, like really, really good. It seems as though from online, from just like looking at clips that people put up, because social media is incredible that way, he's just like an investor type of guy, Forex and all that type of stuff. Like, he was that type of dude. Funny story about Jontay Porter. Me and another media member, we were in an elevator one day. He came in and we were like, "Hey, Jontay, how you doing, man? Man of the people." Because usually the Raptors elevator is different from the media elevator. So we go into different spots. But he came in, he's like, I'm like, "Man of the people." He's like, "You already know." And I'm like, "Oh, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by?" No, I'm just playing around. But yeah, I don't know, man. It's going to be an interesting situation. I would imagine the NBA lays down the law if they find any wrongdoing in a pretty major way, just because, that's not something they can tolerate, especially with the way that they're promoting gambling and betting into their sport,
It's inevitable at this point. I keep going back to, so you remember that Knicks Rockets game where Brunson got called for the foul at half court, right? And somebody, like, in our outrage in the post game, somebody put, like, "Are we sure, like, this is where gambling being so intrinsic into the sport now? You have to at least ask the question." And I think that is the new reality that we're facing as fans or consumers, or as
even as
covering
media.
the league.
Man, there was a Raptors Magic game, and Jalen Suggs for some reason didn't play the entire second quarter. And my entire mentions was, "Why is Suggs not playing the second quarter? Is my bet void? Is my bet void?" And I'm like, I don't know how to answer that question for you. But also, that's the first thing that comes to people's mind, right? And so I guess, I don't know. Whatever. We'll see what happens with the end result of the Porter situation. I think that'll dictate a lot of how people digest it. But yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
And look, the NFL has a significantly more difficult issue with this because, like, fantasy football is a form of gambling and is like why the Red Zone channel exists. And now you're just like, they passed a new rule this week that eliminated a type of tackle, and it's just adding more ways for referees to infect the game. And again, that's where, look, from a consumer standpoint, I think you have to know yourself. And like, I personally we'll just get personal for a second. I don't drink alcohol because I know I have addictive personalities when it comes to consumption, and I just, like, that's not something I partake in. I don't judge people that, like, drink alcohol. My mom drinks wine every night. My wife drinks wine every now and then, but just, I know my limits.
Yeah.
And yet, like, I see beer commercials during every single sporting event that I've ever been to. And I just know it's part of the fabric. And I think that's where it's up to everybody individually to think of gambling like that. The problem is when, like, if someone that has an alcohol addiction plays for a team or maybe a gambling addiction and is like, let me hit this parlay that for this game I'm about to play in, that it becomes so easily accessible and becomes, an issue. I'm glad we had that conversation because it's part of the fabric of the sport at the moment.
It's also like a variable thing. Like, there's so many moving parts to it. You mentioned the officiating, you mentioned the rule changes, you mentioned the fact that, like, there's just more of gambling and betting happening now. And so everything is sort of this moving target. You're never going to find a perfect recipe for any of this, but it's also, you got to put in safeguards. Like, there should be safeguards for social media. I'm on my phone a lot, and I understand this. Speaking of, addictive personalities, I understand it. And like, there should be safeguards for a lot of this, And so, very, very tough. We'll see how the NBA handles it with Porter.
That was a very important conversation, an important topic that we just covered. I don't know how we're going to transition to this basketball game between the 43 and 28 Knicks and the 23 and 49 Raptors. But thankfully, as you mentioned, both teams have given us multiple versions of the season to pay attention to and to talk about. The first that I want to discuss with you is the fact that you warned me after the trade was made that OG Anunoby will probably miss some time, and you'll just be like, all right, OG's out. And I don't know why. This was supposed to be a day-to-day thing, and it's been 3 weeks. And I will say I'm going to blame part of what the Anunoby experience has been so far on the Knicks and just their secrecy when it comes to disclosing information to the public. But he went down with the bone spurs at first when it was like apparently an injury that started barking in practice, and then like he was a pregame scratch, and then he was just day to day with elbow soreness, and then the day of the trade deadline they announced
he's having surgery.
That he had surgery. But the way it was reported was that he had surgery, so we didn't know if it happened like a week ago and he was just out with soreness for a week. And then he comes back about a week and a half ago, and like they look awesome. And that's the other part. They're 15-2 when he's played this year. So it's been a wonderful experience on the court. And then he falls in the second game back. He lands on it. Well, okay, he
yanked it, right?
Yeah, he put his hand in the cookie jar as someone was driving, and he like extended it, and then took a couple layups. Now, like, stayed in the game, played the next game, shot poorly, and every time he shot, you could see him grab the elbow. And like it didn't stop him from playing great defense. He kind of only used one arm, which kind of shows how crazy this human might actually be. But I guess my question, and I've heard this from places, and Steph Bondia, the New York Post, alluded to this in an article recently, that it's not that he's soft. That's not the clarification or designation that he was given, but just like OG's not someone that has really ever played through injuries. He's like, I'm going to wait until 100%. And I recognize that someone in a contract year is going to be a little more skeptical with coming back. Now, I have no idea, because again, it's the Knicks, how much of his recent absence is on him or how much of it is the Knicks saying we're going to hold you out while we play some lesser opponents. But in your time covering OG, was that part of the weird injuries that you were alluding to? Was part of it also that he's going to wait and take his time to come back from said weird injuries?
Yeah, I mean, look, there was an eye injury at one point where it was like, oh, he's day to day or he's game time decision. And then it turned out to be like a week thing. And there was a finger or a thumb issue that was similar to that. And so, yeah, I think, I mean, from what you see and what you hear, he seems like a guy who just wants to be 100% like all the time that he plays, or as close to 100% as he possibly can be. And like OG, you kind of have to bake in that he's going to miss like 15 to whatever amount of games a season. And it's not, initially when we had this conversation, you were asking about like his lower body. Like, is it the knee? Is it the whatever? It's rarely that. Like, it's an elbow this time, and I just mentioned a thumb and an eye, and there's a thigh injury here. He had the appendix during the playoffs in 2019. And so like, it's just these strange injuries that happen to him. I think part of that is because of how physical of a defender he is and how physically he plays. Like, he's such a bully ball type of guy that the physicality part is required to play that he wants to play. So maybe that aspect is like, hey, I need to be 100% to play the way that I want to play. So we need to wait until I'm 100% to do this. But then at the same time, he came back, right? He came back with that elbow thing, assuming that he was 100% and tweaked it almost immediately. And you wonder to yourself, you're like, where is the disconnect there? And so from your perspective, from my perspective, I totally understand where you're like, how do we bake in the fact that OG is going to be missing these games? How do we, I guess, just digest the fact that this guy is going to be a guy who will have a knick-knack injury here and there, a shoulder, an eye, an ear, whatever, that's just the way it's been for OG so far in his career.
I think I personally, and I've told Knicks fans this too, I will start to worry if he misses Sunday. They play the Thunder on Easter Sunday. He went out the second to last game. So they had a 4-game West Coast trip, and he played the first 2, was instrumental in the win over the Kings. And I got to be honest, the vibes that we were experiencing in January when they were 12-2 in the lineup, the Kings game was the first time that they really, well, so there's still a Randall piece that's missing from the offensive side of the ball. Now that they looked great against the Sixers 2 nights earlier, but it's the Sixers. That Kings team is a dynamic offense, and they just decided at one point in the fourth quarter, you're not scoring the rest of the game, and they didn't. Like that's a really good record setting from a year ago Kings offense, and the Knicks gave up 91 points. And like OG was part of it. They had Hartenstein basically as the back line of defense, and then OG on help, and then Sabonis was just in jail for the entirety of crunch time. And then he went out the next game. So I guess the question I would ask you in the times that, well, first of all, did you ever experience this version where it's like, because I'm stunned when they lose at this point. They've only lost twice, and they're like 2 Josh Hart rebounds away from being 17-0. So like seeing him optimized with the Knicks, like, is that like, is it safe for me to be like, okay, as long as he doesn't miss like playoff games, we're good? And like in your experience with the Raptors, was it like, there are games he's okay to miss, and then at a certain point we'll be worried about him? Yeah.
And by the way, OG, through the time that he's played with the Raptors, has had an incredible knack of elevating his game in the playoffs. You look at his playoff numbers versus regular season numbers, they go up. Like his shooting percentages go up. His efficiency is better. In that Raptors-Sixers series a couple of years ago in 2021, he was a really big catalyst. And right before that, he had an injury. So he was injured, I want to say up until maybe a week before the season ended. And then he returned, had a couple of games under his belt, transitioned right into the playoffs, and he was great in their playoff series against them. So I don't think he's one of those guys that like needs a lot of time to get back into the swing of things. Maybe the jump shot needs to get to that point, and that will take just reps and practice. And obviously with it being an elbow injury, like you always got to make sure. I'm sure Knicks fans know a lot about elbows. Raptors fans know a lot about elbows because of Landry Fields. If you remember, he had the elbow thing that happened to him, and he was just never the same type of shooter he was.
That is a callback, my friend.
It is a callback. I remember it though. I remember I'm like, man, we got Landry Fields. This game time, baby, let's go. And he had an elbow injury, and he was just never the same. But it was a nerve elbow thing versus OG. It's like a bone thing that seems to be the issue with him. I mean, look, to your question and to your point, the Knicks, when healthy, in my opinion, I've said it to you before, said it on Twitter a bunch, are like the second best team in the East. They're better than Milwaukee. They can put up a really good fight against Boston, maybe win a series against Boston. And I'm not sure if we get that fully healthy version this year, but I do think next year you're looking at a team that could like maybe win the East or like be number 1 in the East and like be like, oh, the Knicks, they're going to have 4 All-Stars or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that type of team. It seems like this year is just the injury year for you guys, which sucks because Knicks fans, y'all know me, man. I'm a Knicks fan at heart too, right? I want this team to be successful too. And yeah, it sucks to see, but I think you got to kind of take those bumps before the team fully galvanizes next season.
What's tough is the version of this team, when the injury started, like
they looked incredible. Yeah.
That's sad. That last week, I've said this a ton of times, so everybody knows where I'm going with this, but that week leading up to the Randall dislocation, which coincided with like OG didn't play the next game either. So
yeah,
like they both went out at the same time. Then, you know, Hartenstein gets like, he has an Achilles thing that he's playing through. Tibbs was kind of overusing him. Then he's like, I mean, I got to be honest with you. The biggest development this season is like just the flat growth of Tom Thibodeau, that he's like honoring certain players and their minutes restrictions,
right?
That like he's experimenting more with smaller lineups, when like the whole issue the day before the week of the RJ Quickley trade was that Tibbs won't play Brunson and Quickley together. Now he's starting Brunson and Deuce McBride together.
Yeah.
And like a creative Tom Thibodeau with his preparedness is actually like what I would want to see with the healthy version of this roster.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that week leading up to the injuries, they had beaten Brooklyn in like a final straw of like, all right, we never have to worry about that Brooklyn error ever again. Then they beat the defending champion Nuggets by 38 points at home. Right. And then they beat Miami, which to a lot of us, specifically me, might be the boogeyman. And Miami ended that game by being like, all right, you won, but we're going to go full heat culture and injure one of your players. And just had to put it out there. And that's when Randall went down. And it's just been like, hopefully we can get to that version of the team before the season ends. And I'm not fully giving up that we never see it. The Randall thing is, it seems like they know they've got one card to play. And it's like, we're going to throw you out there once. And the moment you're hurt, it's like, okay,
it's over.
You're getting surgery. Like we played it. Like he hasn't even been cleared for contact yet. So it seems like they know they can only clear him once because there's no like play and then we'll reevaluate play. No, you get injured again, your season's over. So we'll see what direction they go with that. I'm glad you feel so glowingly about the team. I think it's going to be a very curious offseason to see if they just kind of run it back with the healthy version of this year's team.
Yeah.
But we'll see. The interesting other side of this Knicks season is how it started, and it was with RJ Barrett and Immanuel Quickley in the rotation, and two very, very big fan favorites.
Yeah.
I went through that list earlier of the Raptors season. The tragedy aspect of it is not lost on me either.
Yeah.
And look, I have a little brother, and I've lost family members to cancer. And seeing what RJ and Quick have had to go through, I can't imagine. I don't talk about like my faith a lot on this show, but like my dad's a pastor and like I grew up in the church and I'm like always taught about a perfect plan. Mm-hmm. And just like both and RJ being home for this when it happened was just not lost on me, that he's like surrounded by family when it happened. I also like Darko. One of the early games or experiences with Quickley in the locker room. I know Quickley's very big on his faith, but like when the Warriors coach passed away and was like really close with Darko, I watched the post game clip that the huddle that got put out from the locker room, and the first person to hug Darko was Quick. And so, I mean, I can understand that while this season might be like playing out the string and a lot of losing is being done, it just like really warmed my heart to see both RJ and Quick back on the sidelines, back surrounded by their teammates at the Nets game on Monday night. I say all of that to ask you, from your time behind the scenes, like how have things been? Like what have you like as much as you could tell us, like how have things been for both of them behind the scenes?
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, it's been a heartbreaking couple of weeks for the Raptors. On top of everything else we just mentioned, which is just like a whirlwind of a season, but they've also had to deal with a lot of loss, and it's never easy. It's also, people deal with grief in their own different ways. And so you just want to be there for them. You don't want to like say, hey, come back or whatever. But I think the reason that the Raptors sort of brought Barrett and Quickley both back on Monday was just to give them a change of scenery. And to kind of get them out and about a little bit more and interacting with teammates, like you said. And, they were smiling a little bit on the bench just to get their moods up a little bit, I think is a really important part of this. And, Darko mentioned that they're like returning to conditioning, and who knows if they'll play against the Knicks or whatnot. I'm sure they both do want to play against the Knicks. But I don't know. I think ultimately when you look at what this team has gone through this year, and not to mention like the 1,000,001 things they've had to deal with, it does galvanize a group a little bit. And I think the young, youthful nature of this group has really helped them kind of come together. You talk about RJ and Quick. I think they're both sort of leaders in certain ways, and they've shown that so far. RJ, even during this losing streak and even before the losing streak, like when they were struggling, was sort of that guy who would come out post game, answer every question. And he was the guy who would get the call to be like, hey, there's one guy that we're going to talk to from the players in the media. That's all. That's the only person we're talking to, because The team isn't good. The team is losing. You guys only get one, right? And RJ was the guy that, for the most part, would come out and talk to us and sort of just dissect everything and break everything down. I think that is a really, really important part. And Quickley, I think, is just like a ball of energy. You know, he has a ton of energy. He's always smiling, always laughing about. You see him during warmups, interacting with everybody. And I think that is a pretty good tandem to have when you have such a youthful team, such a young team. There's a couple of good veterans on the Raptors, you know, Kelly Olynyk and Garrett Temple, who sort of like usher this group and kind of lead them in their own way. But to have, for lack of better words, like boots on the ground, like dudes who play and are in the trenches with them all the time, and Quickley and Barrett, to also sort of be leaders and voices in a certain way, it's been tremendous for this group. And I think they've gone through their own bumps on the court, like figuring out how they can just get better in their careers. I think off the court is where they've grown the most. And they've sort of been able to take on bigger roles, if you will, as like figureheads of this organization in a lot of ways, which is awesome. And, you know, that the last 2 weeks has derailed that, sadly and unfortunately. But again, you just want to be there for them, let them grieve the way they want to. And, you know, hopefully next year they'll be able to start fresh, right?
That's one thing that I'm not taking to say the Knicks should take credit for what the versions of young men that were sent to Toronto. You know, RJ being the son of a professional athletes. Yeah. You know, he's had a whole life of being prepared to be in the spotlight, and you recognize that, you know, while they may have been on their way to being officially grown up and ready to take on that leadership role you're talking about, sometimes the tragedy that we're alluding to and the grief that we're alluding to can also shape that and have you be prepared for when you have a young player come into your locker room and you're 26, 27, and you remember what you went through and how the organization and how the vets were there for you. And it's why I got to be honest. I mean, I'm curious if they play on Wednesday night, and I would be surprised, to be completely honest, although there's something poetic about it if they do play. Yeah. I'm just happy. I'm looking forward to seeing them at this point, because like those were our guys for the longest time. And when what happened to them, it kind of happened to us too. So, you know, hopefully they're on the up and up. I do want to ask a basketball question about them, if it's okay. I know that it's like we're talking about such serious stuff on this pregame pod, but
yeah, sure.
The fact that RJ's effective field goal percentage like is what it is, and like, look, we talked about how they were getting him out in transition. I think RJ said something during FIBA about how rim's wide open, and that stood with me, because like you go to the Knicks and it's like, yeah, Mitch or Hartenstein are always in the dunker spot. He's always playing. Like we talked about Randall, him being optimized because he's now playing with Anunoby, who's a better shooter. And it's like, well, RJ was also playing next to like, well, a center and Josh Hart in the second unit, and then a center and Julius Randle in the starting unit. And they were always asking him to be a floor spacer. And now on this team, like Kelly Olynyk is now the center, and they're playing 5 out more. And like that Nuggets game where he went toe to toe with them, that was like, I've seen his whole career, and that was one of the more impressive games I've seen him play, like even aside from the Knicks career that I saw him play. That seems to be the focus, that they're just like win or loss be damned. Like, we're going to just optimize him in the style of play that's best for him. And from what I can tell, it's led to some really great returns so far, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's been incredible. Like I put him on my most improved teams list because I just thought he has been an incredibly improved player. Like, he's been more efficient. He's making better decisions with the ball in his hands. I think you mentioned the 5-out offense. Even when they had Jakob Poeltl, who isn't necessarily like a shooter by any means, they're still setting him up at the high post area. And so the paint is wide open for guys to cut around. And RJ has been a great cutter, like an incredible off-ball mover, cuts into space, finishes through traffic. I think, to your point about Randall and Hartenstein, like Barrett is more of a 4 than a 3, you know, and he's such a bruiser. He's such a like guy who loves to play bully ball that on the inside, if you give him enough space, he can really take advantage of guys who just aren't as strong as him. And we've seen that. Like, that's exactly how he's been thriving throughout. Yeah, he's shooting like 40, or he was shooting like 40% from three, but his volume is way down. He's not taking as many threes. He's more so just optimized in space, trying to be this off-ball cutter. The Raptors system of off-ball movement and cutting has really emphasized that too. And man, it's like, he mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, but the fact that when he passes the ball, he knows he can get the ball back is something that has clearly helped him become more of a playmaker. Those were almost exactly his words post game, where he was like, I'm passing the ball in a system where I know I'm getting the ball back. And, you know, you have this playmaker, like, he gets downhill, tons of players kind of converge on him in the paint. He uses that to make plays for others. And that's an area where I want him to grow and like continue to grow and kind of expand. So, yeah, I mean, I just think the Raptors system just made more sense for what RJ needed in his career. And that's why he's doing it this way. There
are some very loyal Knicks fans that were determined to see RJ Barrett succeed here in New York that are going to hear you say that. And it's just, you're
going to drive them crazy. I'm sorry.
My goodness, a moth to the flame, man. I tell you, the fact that, and most of it is anti-Randall, which, like, guy was an all-NBA player, guy made 3 all-star teams. Like, that's the competition RJ was up against. To your point though, and like Macri and I had this conversation about RJ's most improved case. I mean, look, just from like earlier this year, he's the most improved player. And if you just look at, like, he's a 55 effective field goal percentage for the season. Compare that to last season. That's still an improvement. Like, I get most of it is almost entirely his Raptors tenure, and it's like 27 games. But, like, my goodness, that's still a stark improvement.
I mean, if he got votes, on, like, you know, I mean, look, I hear you. Like, he's finishing 70% of his shots at the rim or something along the lines of that. Like, his career high before this was like 55. Like, it's not even comparable. It's not even in the same ballpark. He has less he has less unassisted field goals than he did when he was in New York. Like, he's not having to create his own shot as often. And I think that's really just helped him excel. Like, if this continues, he's going to be a really, really good off-ball player who's also trying to maximize his ability on ball as a creator for others. And that's why, you know, like, he was leading some bench units, right, for New York, if I'm not mistaken.
The primary starter that played with the bench. Yeah.
I think that has translated really well in Toronto, where it's like, hey, you're playing with Jordan Nwora, Ochai Agbaji, and Jontay Porter. Go make something happen. And he does. Like, for the most part, yes, there's going to be some turnovers and headaches and whatnot, but, like, he'll get downhill. He will attract a ton of help, kick it out. Guys will make shots. And, like, Coach Darko called him Manu, like Manu Ginobili. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember? Did you see that clip by any chance? So he called him.
I didn't see the clip, no, but he called him Manu.
We asked him, we're like, hey, like, what do you think of RJ's recent, like, playmaking ability? He's like, Manu Ginobili. I think he plays like Manu Ginobili. And I'm like, man, really? That's the guy you're going to bring up? And he's like, yeah, he's a lefty. So his ability to kind of like make passes is somewhat like Manu. And he wants him to explore that element of his game more often. And yeah, I mean, we'll see. I don't think he is Manu, but just the fact that Darko trusts him enough to make plays, I think it'll work out long term.
Yeah, look, it has been just flat out fascinating to see, like, him basically be put in the Randall role without the pressure of what, like, the Knicks are trying to accomplish, and he's able to really thrive in it. Yeah. And we'll see, you know, if it continues into next season. The Quickley side of it, I mean, you tell me, like, it seemed up and down that like there'd be good stretches, bad stretches, getting used to being the starting point guard. He'd have some efficiency issues, but then there'd be some games where it's like, oh, we see it, like what this could eventually be. Right.
Yeah. I mean, with Quick, I think, like you said, there's just the trouble of learning how to be a starting point guard in the league. I think the start of his tenure with the Raptors, he was honestly just getting used to starting. Like, I think he was so used to coming off of the bench that his rhythm was a bit off, of him being like, oh, I have to do this right now versus 10 minutes from now. Like, there's a difference, I guess, like a biological clock there is to like getting into the rhythm of the game versus like just starting the game that way. And so, yeah, I think that's part of it, but also his connection with some of the bigs on the team it's very clear to me that like a good screen setter is very important for Immanuel Quickley. He was great with Isaiah Hartenstein in New York. He's also excellent with Jakob Poeltl in Toronto. Like that connection is very, very clear as day. The pick and roll, playmaking, the pull-up shooting, it opens up so much more for him when he's set next to a good screen setter. I think that's part of it. His growth. And the other thing I would say is post All-Star break, they really allowed him to be more of a scorer. I think when he first got there, he probably felt like, oh, I'm the starting point guard of this team. I have to make every single play. And then it slowly became, you don't have to make every single play. You don't have to be the guy who has the ball in his hands all the time. You're so good off of the ball as a shooter, as a guy who can create space for others, that let's leverage that for you to be able to make plays for others. So now he was flying off of screens, seeing two, making the dump off pass, or flying off of screens into space, and that attention creates an opening for someone else, and that makes a play, right? And so that's why he looked excellent post All-Star break. I think it was like 25-5 or 22-5-5 post All-Star break for a pretty good stretch there. I would say about 10, 13 games before he got hurt. Yeah, that's what Quickley is. Like, I think they're going to figure out a way to maximize how him and Scottie look together. And that will require Scottie becoming a better screener, Scottie becoming a guy who can connect with Quickley more often. I think sometimes guys actually aren't used to Quickley's shooting ability and his relocating ability, so they don't see him on those relocation opportunities. You know, like Scottie will get into the post and barrel down, or RJ will get into the post and barrel down and not even see Quickley because they're not used to him like flying. I don't know. Maybe RJ is more than Scottie, but Scottie definitely isn't. And so you need that little bit of growth and just chemistry together. Like throw Scottie and Quickley into a gym for the entire summer and just let them figure that out, because that's going to be a huge part moving forward.
That's what I was going to hint at. Like, that's where the inertia of just like all of them getting to know how each other play. Like, that's where them growing together from this point in their careers could pay dividends. And
sure.
I guess I have two questions before I let you get out of here. So
inertia is a great word, by the way. Good for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Shout out to, I can't take full credit. Benji Ritholtz, he put it in a thread a couple years ago about how to get Julius Randle to play better. And it's like inertia demands that he doesn't think. Like he just like does, like he just acts. And so ever since, like, wow, now I know, like I visually nav like a way to see what inertia means. But thank you, Benji, for including that in my vocabulary going forward. A team of Immanuel Quickley, Scottie Barnes, Grady Dick, RJ Barrett, Jakob Poeltl.
Sure.
And then on the bench, Gary Trent Jr., Bruce Brown, and Kelly Olynyk. Like those being your top 8. Yeah. How good's that team? Is that a 35-win team? Is it a 45-win team? Are we seeing close to what it? Well, I don't think there are losers of 11 straight, but just from that baseline, how good is that team?
I think this year they would have been a playing team. Honestly, if Scottie didn't get hurt and if, you know, guys weren't out for personal reasons and whatnot, I do think if this team was fully healthy to end the year, they would have been in that 10 spot with over Atlanta and Brooklyn, especially because Atlanta is dealing with that injury to Trey and Brooklyn is like free falling in its own way. If the Raptors were fully healthy, they would be in the 10 spot. Now, after that, it's like, okay, how can you get to 7, right? How can you get to 8? How can you get to 7, 8 and compete with like Chicago, which I think they're like, even saying that, like they could beat a Chicago in a play-in team. I could 100% believe them beating
one
Chicago.
Game sample. I absolutely think they could. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's like, all right, so how are you going to compete against like Miami and Indiana and, you know, those types of teams that like are kind of middle of the pack Eastern Conference teams that are frisky, have pretty good top end talent, pretty much always develop guys well. Like, how are you going to do that? I think that is like betting on Scottie to grow into the potential all NBA player that he is. Hope that RJ can keep this type of productivity up and for Quickley to grow into his own. And I think they just need a full season, man. Like it's hard for me to really gauge and answer this question truthfully without watching them for a full year, because we just don't know. Like we've gotten like 20 games, maybe less than 20 games, honestly. Actually 100% less than 20 games, because when Quickley came in, Jakob Poeltl got hurt. And then when Jakob came back, Scotty Barnes got hurt. And so we never really got to see this team, maybe for a total of like 5 or 6 games where this team was fully healthy. And in those 5 or 6 games, they went 5-0. So I don't know how to digest that information without seeing it for a longer period. So I need a full season to like fully give you this answer. But I think they would be a playing team.
So your 5-0 is my 15-2 with Anunoby.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah,
the exact same thing. I hear you. Okay. The last thing I got, I mean, look, to this matchup on Wednesday, I mean, they've lost 11 straight.
It's going to be a dud, man. Let's just let
you. So here's another common phrase that makes its way around Knicks land. It's PTSD. Okay. And maybe we're just like following the lead of Tom Thibodeau, who in a 30-point game will still have his starters in with 3 minutes left. But I just, you respect the opponent, as I can't believe those words just came out of my mouth, as Tom Thibodeau would say. If specifically, I'm not worried if RJ and Quickley don't play, because I'm confident the Knicks should win that game. If RJ and Quickley play, and look, this is where I'd have to look at the bigger story for them basketball and be like, that's actually like, if they were to come back and win that game, as much as I'd want the Knicks to be the 3 seed, that's the human element would probably take over. I just, what version of the Raptors should Knicks fans expect on Wednesday?
Oh man, well, I just told you about like the 6 different versions they've experienced throughout the season. I would be very surprised if RJ and Quickley play. I mean, I get it from the narrative and story perspective. Them coming back versus New York would be a pretty great story to tell. I don't think that is possible. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong on this all, and maybe they'll be conditioned to the point and be up for it on Wednesday to play. But if they aren't, which is the likely scenario, you're facing a team that is, Gary Trent Jr. is the number 1 option. Grady Dick is running 1,000,001 pin downs to get open. And, they're using Kelly Olynyk as this high post hub to find cutters with Jordan Nwora and Ochai Agbaji and Mamadou Gay. And I mean, look, I'm getting into the weeds here.
I hear it. Yeah, I hear it.
And so it's been tough from my perspective to really like take these games with any sort of like, I told you, like you said, I did a Ochai Agbaji breakdown and I sort of felt silly doing that. Even just, I was like, man, I'm doing this and I understand the perspective that I'm trying to provide. I think Ochai can be a good player for this Raptors team moving forward, but the games themselves are hard to take serious because of how bad this team currently is.
Right.
And they are going to probably continue to be bad unless RJ and Quickley return. And then I have something more to talk about. So yes.
Okay.
That's all you're going to get. I mean, it should be a cakewalk. Let's be real.
Listen,
it should be an easy one there.
With respect to any Raptors fans tuning in, I'm very much hoping it's a cakewalk. I'm very much hoping this is the 12th straight.
Like, look, they played the Kings on Wednesday, and the Kings are notorious. I mean, I kind of put out the injury report, and Kings fans jumped on me, and they're like, "Oh, Kings are gonna lose," because the Kings always lose these type of games, and the Kings just walked into Toronto, beat them by 30, called it a day. On Friday, it was OKC, and there was tons of glitz and glamour for Shea and Lou and all those guys. And those guys didn't even break a sweat, and they beat the Raptors, although the Raptors kept it kind of close. Played Washington. They lost to Washington because of Kyle Kuzma and, guys like that hitting shots for a 13-win team. And then on Monday, despite a pretty valiant effort, they lost to a Brooklyn Nets team that looks just as bad as they look right now. And so they don't have the horses. Like, they just don't have the guys to rightfully play and compete in basketball games anymore. If you were to put out this team for an entire 82 games, I think they would be the worst team in the NBA. It's just, you're going to clip that and put it out.
No. I see your Wednesday version of the Raptors, and I see the version of the Pistons I watched last night.
It's fair enough.
There may just be like a tie. Fine.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, we're reaching the LA Fitness portion of the season. I call it like I'm sure I don't know if you have ever had a membership there, but
I go there currently. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So the Saturday morning rec league games, just after work rec league games where no one plays defense, and you're just getting your points and getting your cardio. Like, that's what the last 2 weeks of the NBA season is for a lot of teams. That's when Obi Toppin gets 40 points. It's when Theo Pinson gets a triple-double. It's when Kevin Knox gets 30 in 3 straight games. It's when Udonis Haslem in his last regular season game is able to take 8 threes and nobody cares. Like, the LA Fitness portion of the schedule is notorious. And I think we have certain teams have already signed up for their membership. And it seems as if the Raptors, with everything they've gone through this year, are fully in LA Fitness mode. Yeah,
look, I mean, again, to kind of circle back to the top of this pod, like, they've been through a lot. I'm not discounting any of that. They've had a lot of things happen to them. And even Darko was like, hey, man, like, this is hard to work through and work around. And there's a lot of guys who, you know, are probably not necessarily the happiest with the outcome of this season and how it's kind of shaken out, but it's what it is at this point. And to be honest with you, I think a lot of people are just waiting for it to be over so that they can start fresh. A blank slate would be incredible for this Toronto Raptors team right now, because I think the talent is there on the roster. I think the coach is a good coach that can galvanize a group, but there's just been so much that's gone wrong for this team that they've never really been able to catch anything. So yes, let's end that there and hope the Knicks can get the 3 seed so that they can avoid Boston in round 2, meet them in the conference finals. Hopefully OG and Randall are healthy by then, win a 7-game series, and then go to the NBA finals and lose valiantly to the Denver Nuggets, because that's what would happen. But at least you get a finals.
You want to make this full circle? I may or may not have a future bet on
there you go. Yeah.
Nuggets to win the finals. So I would win either way. The Knicks win the finals or the Nuggets win. Yeah. And I promise I don't have a problem, everybody. It's literally just one future bet sitting in my FanDuel account. It's always great talking to you. 1 minute we'll spend on it. Like, Precious Achiuwa is a very positive contributor to this Knicks rotation.
I told you, man. I told you he was going to be good, man. Look, I knew there was going to be the headaches and like he takes bad shots and all that stuff. But
not a single. I gotta be honest. There's no bad shots. He's been forced to take threes because when Tibbs was deploying this lineup of him at the 4, Josh Hart at the 3. And it was like, okay, if Dante's not hitting everything, they're going to load up on Brunson. And make either Josh Hart or Precious Achiuwa beat you with the 3, beat you with threes. And like, those are the only bad shots you see. Like, they just kept him in the dunker spot. He's been a monster on the, like, so last night, Dante
great defender, man. He's such a good defender.
Oh my gosh, such a good defender. And he's a perfect Tibbs guy. And it's weird. Again, this is the evolution of Tibbs. He started him at the 4 for the longest time. Then OG came back, and it was like, all right, so are we about to see OG at the 3, Precious at the 4? I kind of want Josh Hart in there. Starts Josh Hart instead. And it's like, Precious is now your backup 5. Right. Then OG goes out, and you think, all right, we're going back to Precious, and we're just going to try to win the possession battle. Deuce McBride goes in. And it's like, Precious has been able to be like the innings eater all season. And now, like, last night, DiVincenzo hits 11 threes. Brunson is 28. Josh Hart has a triple-double. A quiet 16 rebounds for Precious Achiuwa off the bench. Like,
amazing.
Just a positive contributor since he's been like in the rotation.
I don't remember if I exactly said these words when we first did like the reaction thing, but I was surprised when the Raptors included him in the trade. Like I genuinely was. And like seeing this and seeing how he's kind of turned out to be this refined role version of him, I think he just needed to go to a place that was going to allow him to do that. The Raptors were asking too much, like be a high post initiator, be this like offensive hub. He can't do that, but like what he's doing in New York right now, rim running, being in the dunker spot, playing great defense, rebounding, all he needs to be successful. So kudos to him, man. I'm excited because like he also is looking for money this summer. Like he's looking for an extension too. So interested to see how that shakes out. But
Knicks have a lot of guys like that. And while Precious was starting and having some of these, like, I kid you, I'm sure you saw like 20 and 13 games.
Yeah.
You know, there was like, are we sure the Knicks shouldn't be looking to extend him this summer? It's like, guys, I like him. If he can go get a bag, he can go get a bag, and he's earned it, right? I don't know if he's necessarily the Knicks priority, but if he wants to come back because he's from here and he's found a home here, awesome. We'll take him.
Yeah.
But
he likes New York Fashion Week. He's a fashion guy. He might.
So that's the thing I do remember you telling me about him, that his fashion was gonna. It hasn't come through yet. The New York aspect of him has very much come through. Local kid, I believe from the Bronx, and like that aspect. We're big on our familial aspecents of the Knicks. Whether you like went to Kentucky or went to Villanova or represented by CAA, like we're big on those aspects. So anyway,
Mikal Bridges, New York Knick, future New York Knick. Huh?
I don't think because the Knicks and Nets will never make a trade. It's honestly that was the most frustrating part about the rumor about the Rockets, because them turning down that trade, that's the path to the Knicks. Is Mikal Bridges goes to the Rockets, demands a trade, and gets traded to the Knicks.
Gets traded to the Knicks.
Like that's the only way, because the Knicks and Nets are never making a trade. Anyway, another member of the family is new Knick fan, Es Baraheni.
That's right.
And it's always great chatting with you, my friend. Before you get out of here, please let the fine folks at home know what's up with you and where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, man. Follow me at Knicks Film School. No, I'm just kidding. You see the Twitter on there at just Es Baraheni. You can follow me on there. We do Raptors recaps and whatnot at Raptors Republic. Do some writing for Forbes on the Raptors and the rest of the NBA. Hopefully I can write something about the Knicks soon. I would like to. If you guys get fully healthy, I will. So, yes.
Oh. Yeah. Well, I'm very much hoping then that you get to write something on the Knicks. I'd love for them to be fully healthy in the not too distant future. Thank you to us as always for coming on, and thank you to everybody at home for watching or listening to this episode. If you dig the show and you're listening, go over to iTunes, drop a 5-star rating and a review. If you're watching, like this video, remember to subscribe. I will be back Friday morning to preview a very intriguing matchup against Victor Wembanyama and the San Antonio Spurs. But until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the game tonight, and I'll speak with you soon. Peace.